What's up, everyone? We are here. It is March Madness. The first four games have already started. Round of 64 coming up here tomorrow. And to win March Madness, you obviously have to be good. And you can talk about all the champions, but we're going to do that in a little bit of a different way. We're going to talk about the worst March Madness champions from 1985 to present day, and we're going to do a snake draft. We did the order random generator before we started recording. Yours truly got the first pick. I don't know how that happened, but I'm not complaining. I'm joined here with Adam Spencer, Connor O'Gara, and Brett Friedlander from Saturday Down South. How are you guys doing?
Good. It's March.
It's March. Yeah. I don't think you can be doing bad. The weather's starting to get a little nicer, at least where I'm at. I don't know where you guys are all located, but it's the
We're
best
looking
time of
at some
year.
tornadoes in the area, but
Yeah.
sure that won't affect the draft at all.
No, not at all. You're thriving. So I guess we'll just start off. I'll go first with my 101, and I will go with 2014 UConn. They were a 7 seed. I think just the seeding, you can kind of base it off that to make them worthy of the 101. They were, like I said, 7 seed, bubble team heading into the American Conference tournament, ended their regular season on such a poor note. 33-point loss to Louisville. I saw somewhere they were 95-1. They had odds of that magnitude to win the tournament. I guess 7 seed makes sense. It was right after Jim Calhoun, so you didn't have that big name coach. It was like, all right, how are they going to do with Kevin Ollie? And it's funny looking back, UConn versus Kentucky in the championship. It's like, okay, that makes sense. But then you look, UConn was a 7 seed, Kentucky was an 8 seed. Just very weird. So that's my first pick.
That's why
2014
they call it
UConn.
March Madness. I mean, that was like an all-time Shabazz Napier run, like just
Yes.
absolutely all time. And like I know Kimba did it for UConn too, but like Shabazz was like even more random. I felt like
Made Kevin Ollie a lot of money.
Yeah, here's all you need.
100%.
Those two, like all you need to know about this team, which by the way, I had this second on my big board of worst teams. It was going to get picked in the first round. It was a decade ago that this happened. The head coach is unemployed, and the best player has been playing in Europe for the last 5 years. Like this is not a team that is going to stand. We're going to look at this team and just like we will with the other UConn team that I'm sure we'll bring up at some point. We'll say this is an unbelievable individual run, but I thought they got lucky because of Kentucky beating all of these heavy hitters and Kentucky essentially wiping out the field for them. They finished 15th in Ken Palm, which is so hard to do when you win a national championship. It's like it's easily the worst ranking of a national champ of the Ken Palm era. This is a good pick.
There's something to be said about bracket luck, and they got a lot of it. And there are a few other teams on here who also benefited from that.
Awesome.
Right,
Yeah, I'm glad you guys like the pick.
Yeah.
Brett, where are you going 102?
Well, I'm going with one of the feel-good stories of college basketball, but as good as Villanova in 1985 was, they had absolutely no business winning that championship. It took a perfect game, and it was as perfect a game as you're ever going to see. They had nobody on that team that really stood out. And Patrick Ewing and that crew, I think maybe took them a little lightly because they beat them twice during the regular season. And so I'm taking the Villanova Wildcats of 1985.
I like it. The icing on the cake in that game is that it was played on April Fool's Day.
That's right.
Like, that's fantastic. But yeah, shooting, 78, 79% from the field that game, like, could not be more perfect.
They were 1-6 against AP Top 25 competition coming into the NCAA tournament. Still lowest seeded team to win it all too, which that first year of expansion, we're doing post. So like we're the parameters for this is 85 and on post expansion to 64 teams. And I'm sure there were so many people, Brett, you could probably weigh in on this better than us who were born after this happened. Didn't mean to go there.
Okay, I get it. I'm old.
Didn't mean to go, but there was probably this feeling at the time of, oh my God, we expanded the field and look who just won it. This would have been like in college football if Indiana had won the national championship And people are like, oh my God, how did this happen? Is this going to be the new norm of this tournament now that we've expanded it?
It kind of almost was too, because they were the first team, I believe, or maybe the second, because I think maybe Marquette had more than 10 losses, but they're one of the first teams to win a championship with 10 losses. And if you look at in the 80s, after the expansion, there were several teams that were like this. And we're going to get to a few of them here in a couple of seconds, I'm sure. But, and you're right, there was concern that maybe there's too much. And it's funny because we're living that right now. I mean, the debate over North Carolina and Indiana and West Virginia, to be honest with you, none of them deserve to be in that tournament. But, now they're talking about making it, 78 teams? So, yeah, we're having the same conversations now. It's kind of funny how history always ends up repeating itself.
This was one on my board, by the way. Obviously, my first two have been taken with the first two picks, which that's probably not a good sign for how I feel about my picks are going to turn out here.
Well, let's throw a wrench into things here because I'm going to go controversial with my first pick. I think, Connor, do you want to predict which one I'm going to take?
You're going to go 88 Kansas.
Yep.
No, that's on my board. I'm going to go.
Oh, you got that one, Connor.
I'm going to go more controversial than that. I'm going to say 2005 UNC.
Oh,
screw those guys.
Wow.
They had so many NBA players. None of them did a damn thing in the pros. Marvin Williams, their sixth man, was their top pick in the NBA draft. And, who can remember Raymond Felton was the most successful pro on that team. Like, they were trash. And Sean May, I'm going to say I hate him. It's a sports hate. I'm sure he's a fine gentleman, but I hate that guy. Just got all the calls. Like, the refs deserve medals for winning that game against Illinois. They fouled out.
Rashad McCants go on to become a porn star, though?
Did who?
Rashad McCants?
Oh, I don't remember.
I think he did.
I don't know.
If he did, that makes that a much better pick.
Yeah. So, I mean, Sean May, James, that was the best Illinois team. Illinois was absolutely insane. I still remember where I was when I watched that Arizona comeback.
Same.
Just an absolutely loaded team, and then the refs take over the championship game, foul James Augustine out in the first half, or at least he spent a lot of time on the bench in the first half with 4 fouls. Just an absolute and utter just miscarriage of justice there, and that 2000
channeling his inner John Rothstein there.
Yeah, they just did not deserve to win that title at all.
This is a funny pick. And Adam and I both grew up in the state of Illinois. It's the only time in my life. Look, I'm an Indiana graduate, and it's the only time in my life in which Illinois was likable. And I loved that 05 team because Darren Williams, Luther Head, D. Brown. D. Brown's one of those all-time great. You bring him up in a college basketball conversation, real ones know. D. Brown was special. They were doing things with Bruce Weber, with Bill Self's players, were doing things that were so fun to watch. That was way ahead of its time with the way that they shot threes, with the way that they ran tempo. And for that team to lose against UNC is one of the most stunning results of my lifetime because of how convinced I was that Illinois team was going to win a title.
Connor, let's see if you can. So I mentioned James Augustine. You mentioned Luther Head, Darren
Glenn
Williams.
Powell.
Roger Powell.
Roger Powell.
Yes. Hey, that was good. That was good.
James Augustine's overrated, though. I will say that.
That was atrocious officiating.
It was bad.
Atrocious officiating. There we go.
I like the pick. Was not on my board. I'll be honest, but I like it.
Okay, so
all right, Connor has 2 picks here.
Now I feel much better. Now I feel much better about the way that this is going to shape up. This is going to sound like an anti-UConn thing, but you got to go 2011 UConn. And we're talking here about teams specifically. Kemba went on one of the all-time NCAA tournament runs. Nobody will deny that. This is the fighting Kemba Walkers, and the team that I'm going to pick on the other half of this is just that, but 23 years later. Do some quick math, and you'll figure out where my pick is going after this. But that team was 9-9 in Big East play, and we see this record number of Big East teams that get into the field with 11. And this national championship game was so painfully horrible that it deserves a mention. Whoever was going to win that game was going to be on this board, getting picked in the first round, because this national championship was 22-19 at halftime. It finishes 53-41. Butler was 12 of 64 from the floor with everything on the line. And they're 12 of 60. It was so unbelievably bad. They were 3 for 31 on 2-point attempts in this game. 2-point attempts, 3 for 31. You can, that is so mind-numbingly bad. And I just think back to where I was watching this game and how mad I was that it was bad. Kemba was 5 for 19 in this game too. Kemba run was great. The Kemba game itself was not particularly good. But this is an obvious pick. Again, when you're just barely cracking the top 10 in Ken Pom after an NCAA tournament run and you won the title, that tells you all you need to know.
Yeah. I remember this game, how gross it was, because even me, as a kid watching this Monday night, somehow convinced my parents to let me stay up and watch it. And I almost regretted that decision because it was so gross and ugly, so many misses. But yeah, it's a good pick. It was top of my board as well. I was kind of between them and 2014 UConn with the
It's a
first
shame
pick,
that
but
it's a shame that 2010 Butler didn't show up in that game because they would have boat raced that UConn team.
Yeah. Look, I feel so bad saying this because how fun Butler was, and going to Indiana at that time, there were a lot of people that just hopped on the Butler bandwagon. But that national championship made me so angry. Like, people talk about 65-7 Georgia TCU, that national championship, and how mad people were that TCU got in. I was mad that those two teams were playing, and it really prompted about 15 years of, hey, they're in a football stadium, they're probably not going to shoot as well. Those takes are still going, even though that's kind of been disproven in recent memory. But yeah, 2011 UConn absolutely has to be part of this list.
Yeah, their run's kind of crazy. Avoided all 1 seeds. They played 14 seed, 6 seed, 2 seed, 5 seed, 4 seed, then 8 seed Butler in the championship.
Got to get lucky. They definitely did.
They did.
This is the luckiest team that's ever won a national championship in college basketball. My next pick, 1988 Kansas, the Danny and the Miracles team. Danny Manning, 11 regular season losses, most of any national champ at the time. Unranked entering the NCAA tournament. I don't know what they would have finished in Ken Pom. Wouldn't have been top 10. I can guarantee that. 12-8 at one point. Still beat Mizzou twice that year, Adam. A miracle. You weren't alive. It's fine. A miracle was getting to the Final Four when it was in Kansas City. Is that not the most Kansas thing ever? It's just going to work out perfectly for Kansas. They're going to get to the Final Four when it's in Kansas City. No big deal. Like,
that team had one good player. One good player, and he was great.
Unbelievable. To have Danny Manning playing at the peak of his powers, 38-18 in a title game. I went back and watched the highlights. Stacey King, how Stacey King was the 6th overall pick a couple years after that game alone is a tough thing to stomach. Stacey King, fun fact about him, he almost coached my youth travel basketball team, and then he coached a CBA team instead. Whatever the case, Danny Manning owns him forever. But the way that this all shook out for Kansas is just, if I were someone that had a reason to hate Kansas like Adam does, I would point to this run and say, how did this team get, well, first of all, an 11 seed in the first round? Okay, that makes sense. But then 14 seed Murray State because 3 seed NC State was upset. You get 7 seed Vanderbilt in the Sweet 16. Elite 8, you get Kansas State, who's a 4 seed. They'd already faced them 3 times that year. That is just, you're not going to have an easier run to the Final Four, and which, oh, by the way, again, 40 miles from your campus than that.
And then throw in that they were coached by sleazy Larry Brown, who got Danny Manning there by hiring his dad as an assistant coach, and then left and got him put on probation after he was gone. So
I respect that. Actually, that makes me like Kansas a little bit more. I'll be honest.
They only beat the 14 seed Murray State by 3 points too.
Yeah. Juggernaut, the Miracle, Danny and the Miracles, great team.
All right, I'll keep it going here then, and we're just going to keep piling on Kansas here. I'm going to go with the 2008 Kansas team. Like, they're one Mario Chalmers shot away from Derrick Rose being a national champion, and that's just, again, this is going to be a theme, like the guards that just go on runs. We've said it a few times with UConn. Mario Chalmers had a great March, made himself a lot of money, and then went on to the Heat and became LeBron James's scapegoat, I guess. Like, just
whipping boy.
everything that was wrong with the Heat was Mario Chalmers' fault for a good stretch there. So then the connection there, which is interesting, is that then LeBron was like desperate for the Heat to draft Shabazz Napier. Interestingly enough, so there's our March Madness connection there. Yeah, I mean, it was a good Kansas team. Not great. I mean, Daryl Arthur, Sasha Khan, who was fun to watch. Cole Aldrich was on that team. He wasn't really a big contributor. There was Brandon Rush, who is the least popular Rush brother because his brother went to Mizzou, like a like a good Missourian. But Brandon decided to put on the evil colors. I think that. That team, again, just like a lucky shot there, and we're looking at John Calipari's legacy a little bit differently if that shot doesn't go in.
Memphis missed so many free throws. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about how this was like my first year, like crazy into college basketball. Derrick Rose, I was his biggest fan. Loved him, loved Memphis, loved everything about that team. And they just could not make any free throws down the stretch. I went out back the next day, like I shot free throws because I'm like, we need to see these go in. I'm not going to be in a situation like this in my youth basketball league. Like that, it was so frustrating.
The funny thing is, John Calipari, I remember, and he's been very vocal about this in the past for whatever reason. I remember watching Pardon the Interruption as a kid one time, and he was on their 5 Good Minutes segment, whatever their interview segment was on that show. And he answered a question about free throw shooting by saying, if I had to prioritize 30 things about basketball to focus on in practice, free throw shooting would be 31st. And then he lost a national championship because he couldn't make free throws. And so it's kind of tough to feel too bad.
It out
tough.
Because he had that weird quote about the end of the SEC tournament game where bizarrely he told and he
like
just
it's my alma mater.
Yeah, and he's just said, yeah, I do unconventional things. It's like, no, you do stupid things. That's the word you're looking for.
As my wife says, they're free.
They're free.
They are free.
Yeah.
Make them.
All right. Brett, what's your second pick?
I'm going to go with, speaking of free throws, I'm going to go with 1989 Michigan. This is not the Fab Five guys. This is pre-Fab Five. This is a team where their head coach loved that team so much that right before the NCAA tournament, he took the job at where, Arizona, I believe, Bill
Arizona
Frieder?
State.
State, and left, and they fired him, and Steve Fisher took over and took him to the national championship. And even then, now Glenn Rice, great player, had a great tournament, but even then it took one of the softest calls in the history of the Final Four by Jerry Clougherty to send Ramil Robinson to the line to make the winning free throws in overtime to beat Seton Hall. So I'm going to take these Michigan Wolverines.
It's a good pick.
One of the softest calls until all the fouls against James Augustine.
And then the one with Auburn and Virginia and the Kyle Guy phantom 3-point shot that really changed the outcome of the entire tournament.
I think it's and I had this on my board. I think I had it 5th or 6th on my board here. But this team, besides, again, like having the coach who just leaves, doesn't leave, before the NCAA tournament run, but announces he's leaving, and Bo Schembechler just famously is like, all right, get out of here. Steve Fisher, go do your thing. But they lost to Alaska Anchorage earlier in the season.
Yeah, in the Great Alaska Shootout.
Sure. What national champion doesn't? But like this is a team that went on a revenge tour against its own coach. And that's like the only reason that they won. And nobody would point to it being the most memorable Michigan teams. Even though they shot 47% from 3-point range, but they only attempted 11 a game. Brett, what were people doing? Shoot more threes.
Yeah, well, but it was still new back then. So at that point, you had the Dean Smiths of the world. You had the Bobby Knights of the world who change is bad. So, it took a while to kind of get rolling there.
A lot of guys back then, I don't think people remember this, but a lot of guys back then were just like, what is this line? I don't even know what this is. I'm going to ignore it completely. So,
Hey, listen, I remember when it was shorter than it is now. I remember when the 3-point line went through the circle, like just about, I think it was 17 feet maybe. It was ridiculous.
Why did they think that looked good?
I don't know. I just remember Mark Price was the one who took the fullest advantage of that.
Smart. Michigan should have taken more advantage. Probably
Yep.
would have been an easier road to the Final Four.
Hey, but they won it.
True.
He did. I just know there were a lot of upsets. I saw 9 double-digit seed upsets that year. Definitely helped them out there. All right, good pick. I'm going to go for my second pick. A little bit before my time. I'm going to go 1997 Arizona. Just
Miles
based
Simon.
off. Yeah. Yeah, he played great. They struggled a lot during the year, but got hot at the right time. We've talked a lot about paths and kind of some easier paths. They did end up beating 3-1 seeds, but during the regular season, just 11-7 in the Pac-10, 19-9 overall. Nothing too crazy. And then at that time, just not seeing a 1, 2, or 3 seed, like a 4 seed. They were down there. So I'm going with Arizona. Hopefully, you guys can give some more insight to my great.
I covered that Final Four, and it was at the RCA Dome in Indy. And the RCA Dome had this roof that was propped up by wind, right? They had just blowers keeping that fabric roof up. In fact, when you'd walk in the revolving door, it was like a freaking wind tunnel. And I'll never forget it because what's that?
Was that kind of like the Metrodome then?
Yes, it was the same concept. But I remember that game because Carolina got off to a great start. Vince Carter could not miss in the first half. And in the second half, he couldn't throw it in the ocean from the beach. And after the game, when asked what was the difference, he said, we had the wind at our back in the first half and we were shooting into the wind in the second. I kid you not. And that's my memory of that Final Four.
I love my pick even more. That's great.
To be fair, it is Indiana. 49 states, it's just basketball. You're playing outside. You're dealing with the elements. You got the barn hoop that's up there. Nobody probably thought anything of it. I'd never been to the RCA Dome. I've only been to Lucas Oil, and used to be Conseco.
It's an upgrade. Let me tell you. Yeah, Lucas Oil is a big upgrade.
Yeah, that's a good pick though. I had it too. I had it right after Kansas on my board. That '88 Kansas team, even though Bibby and Jason Terry were on this team.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
National championship team that shot 66% from the foul line. Shout out John Calipari with 15 turnovers a game. Not great.
You know what I just remember? I remember was his name Eugene Everson had the biggest afro you've ever seen. And that was very cool. Edgerson, that's it. Eugene Edgerson.
Don't remember him.
Yeah. I just remember him because of the afro. He was, a bench guy. But hey.
Nice. All right, to kick off the third round, those are all I tiered my big board, so those are all the top ones. They're all off. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into, I think, kind of, I guess, a little bit of a personal one from a few years ago. I'm going to go with 2019 Virginia. It was a year after they lost to UMBC, still had a lot of the guys on that team. 2021 it because 2020, there was no tournament. There were still a couple of guys on that team. They lost to 4-seed Ohio, as Virginia does. They either win it all or lose in the first round. And they just play such a gross brand of basketball. Very good defense and just tough to watch. It's not fun. And they would just barely beat teams. They beat Oregon, who was a 12 seed in the Sweet 16. They won by 4. They beat Purdue in overtime in the Elite 8, won by 5. Just gross. Won the Final Four by 1 point. Just a gross. Their offense showed up when they needed to against Texas Tech in that overtime game where I had the under, unfortunately. And just that, maybe that plays a little bit of why I'm picking them, but just a gross brand that's just not fun to watch. I'll put a lot of national championship teams over this Virginia team.
And they got lucky just to get to the Final Four because you remember Purdue had them beat, and they had the lucky bounce on the missed free throw, and Mamadou Diakate, who makes the one shot he ever made in his career, I think, and send him to the overtime. Yeah. So
and then the double dribble that wasn't
the double
called
dribble
against
correct,
Auburn.
yes.
Go ask an Auburn fan. Auburn would have won a national championship if they had called double dribble. It's kind of hard to argue with the way that it played out in that game, but yeah, it is a disgusting team to watch. It was, yeah, that's a fair point.
Embrace the pace, Connor. Come on.
Not that pace. Not unless
Yeah.
you're Houston. Houston's a
I
little bit more fun to watch, I think.
I
That's
love
because
some
they have
good
some guys who
defense.
can play offense too. Virginia was just stymied you to into submission. Yeah,
All
first one of
right.
50.
All
Yep.
right, Brett, you're up.
I'm up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna take 2013 Louisville. It was a good team. Beat a good team, but you know what? They got their championship vacated because they had strippers and all that kind of stuff. So that just kind of
Allegedly.
yeah, allegedly. So anybody who gets their championship vacated, that's a bad champion. So I'm taking 2013 Louisville.
Didn't that team still, because that team was in the AAC, right? They weren't even in
That
the
is
Big
correct.
East.
They were not in the ACC yet.
So
That was
like,
Pitino still. Yeah.
yeah, that team still had, they didn't have the road. Like you could say with like that 2011 UConn team, okay, they at least had to get through the Big East, and they at least had this path that was unbelievable. Whereas that Louisville team, I mean, they still ended up having a difficult path to be able to win a national championship. Who they ended up beating? Was it Michigan?
They beat Duke in the Elite Eight, and it was a crippled Duke team because they had a couple guys injured. Ryan Kelly didn't play, and I can't remember who else was playing at about 50%. Actually, they had one of their players, and I wish I could remember his name. Had a really just a nasty broken leg during that game, and that kind of gave that that
Russ
incentive.
Smith, right?
What's that?
That was the Russ Smith injury in
Russ
Indy.
Smith, yeah, that was his team, yeah. So it was a good team, but I'm putting them on the list just because they got vacated.
Kevin Ware, not Russ Smith. My bad. My bad.
Russ Smith was the best player on that team, though.
Peyton Siva was really good. Luke Hancock
was pretty good
awesome too.
They had a great backcourt. Yeah, it wasn't a terrible team. It was a good champion. I mean, a representative championship team. I think they were a 2 seed in their region behind Duke. But yeah, and anybody who has to take the banner down.
I take it back. I'm wrong about everything about this team. This team was in the Big East. I get lost with Louisville and UConn going all back and forth through their conferences. Apologies to Louisville fans. My bad.
All right. I like it. Adam, your third pick.
I'm probably taking one that might be on Connor's board. I don't know if Connor would, or maybe not. I don't know, but I'm going with 2002 Maryland. Like, I don't know if that's
no, you can't do that.
Team. Like, Juan Dixon was really good, 20 points a game, like really, really good. And I hesitate to, say a bad champion would knock off a Kansas team, which Maryland beat Kansas. So, I appreciate that out of them at least. But yeah, I mean, Steve Blake, went on to some good success, but it was like, it was a lot of those two guys, and that's fine. But
Lonnie Baxter.
Yeah, I mean, fine. Like, it was the Juan Dixon and Steve Blake show. I mean, I did like watching Steve Blake, and they had some pretty convincing wins too. Like, that was, it was fine. It was a fine team. I just didn't really, I don't know. Like, it felt like the ACC was just a little bit down that year when they rolled through it. Like, I don't know. That game against Indiana, I felt, they kind of lucked out getting a 5 seed there. But that was a good Indiana team too. But yeah, I just thought that, there's some, we're getting into kind of an area where there are going to be some surprising, like, pretty good teams that we're going to have to pick here since, we're getting into the, the dregs of the draft here and just getting to the elite teams. But I'm going to pick that 2002 Maryland team. I don't know.
Indiana, I actually, believe it or not, I was not rooting for Indiana in that game. I was 12 at the time. I was in 6th grade. I was on spring break vacation. I was at spring training in Arizona. The room right next to me was Moises Alou. My whole family was staying in a room right across from Moises Alou when he was on the Cubs, and he would come out in his underwear. We have a picture in our family room of us with Moises Alou in his underwear while all this is unfolding. And I remembered loving that Maryland team and thinking that Indiana was a little bit fraudulent. The Tom Coverdale, the greatest redhead in the history of college basketball for at least a 3-year stretch. And the post Bob Knight team was not one that I was necessarily like all in on. And I remembered actually being kind of bummed that AJ Moye had this unbelievable block out to beat Duke in the game that set that. I think that was in the Elite Eight, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Duke team that everybody thought was going to win a national championship that year, and it ends up Maryland gets an easier team to face in that national championship. Jared Jeffries, who was a very overrated college player, but beloved because he was a local in Bloomington. But I was not all in on that Indiana team. I will not hate on that Maryland team. I loved me some Juan Dixon, Steve Blake, Lonnie Baxter too.
Connor, that game was played on my 44th birthday. And and it was actually in my hometown of Atlanta. But that Maryland team had Duke down by 22 in the national semifinal the year before, and then Duke came back when Jay Williams didn't get called for his fourth foul, even though he kind of fell on top of Juan Dixon, like just beyond half court. But anyway, that was a good team, I thought, because it's basically the same. It was kind of a redemption championship for the previous year. And Gary Williams finally got his championship, right?
We'll give Duke, or we'll give Alaska another shout out here, because that Duke team that Indiana beat had Carlos Boozer, perhaps the best basketball player to ever come out of the state of Alaska.
Either him or Trajan Langdon.
Yeah, I like that Duke team with Boozer and Duhan and Jay Will. Those
Dunleavy.
I was surprised that Indiana got past them. So
yeah. And have not come anywhere close to that since. No big deal. All right.
Two Alaska mentions. That's well over the over-under I set for 0.5. So we're doing good here. All right, Connor, your last two picks.
All right. I'll stay in the continental United States. Let's go. I'm gonna start with 2003 Syracuse. We've talked about this type of team before. The preamble is always like, hey, team that you're wondering how in the world are they're maybe not seeded necessarily like a 1 or a 2, and they're only going to get to a place like this if they have their best player just play out of his mind for an entire tournament. And that's exactly what Syracuse had. I remember picking against Syracuse in the first round against Manhattan that year. And I remember being so bothered that team continued to go through. I was like, Carmelo's overrated. And then hand up, not my best take. I've had better takes in my life, but very similar to the UConn teams that we saw play out later with Kemba and Shabazz that we already talked about. They didn't make the NCAA tournament the year before and then won it all upon Melo's arrival. And that kind of tells you all you need to know. It's not quite 2010 Auburn Cam Newton if we're going for a football comp, because Hakeem Warwick was a better player. Adam, the block of Kirk Heinrich in the national championship, I'm sure that's a moment that you remember very well and hold near and dear to your heart. But Melo dragged that team to a title. He was their leading scorer in 14 of their last 16 games. And it was an unbelievable all-time run. And I don't know, Jim Boeheim has been kind of feeding off of it ever since. But 2003 Syracuse has to be picked. And I'm kind of surprised that I got it this late. I thought it would have been picked a little bit earlier.
Yeah, no arguments with that.
Yeah.
So, it seems to be a theme that we're taking a lot of these like heliocentric, I'll throw that word out there.
Yes.
Yeah, so with guys who it's kind of similar to like hockey. You get a goalie who gets hot at the right time, and it's game over for the rest of the league. So yeah, a lot of these guys Melo was unstoppable that year.
He was like the second coming of Danny Manning, right? I mean, because that's the comparable for that team.
Yeah. I don't even think Syracuse fans would push back on that notion that was not an all-time great national championship team, but definitely a great individual run. All right, I'm going to end. This might be a little bit controversial, but I'm okay with it being my last pick. I don't know if anybody else would have gone this direction, but I'm going to go 2000 Michigan State.
I have them on my board. I was hoping to get them next, Connor.
Let's go. Dang it. All right, now I feel much better about this. No disrespect to the Flintstones, just an all-time great college basketball team nickname. Mateen Cleaves, Mo Pete, like great group that I don't think was fraudulent or anything like that. Really solid team. Big Ten's last national champ, famously. Maybe this is gonna, I'm gonna get cold takes, and the Big Ten is gonna have a team finally break through and win one for the first time in a quarter century. But they had the bracket break perfectly. They faced one team with a top 3 seed. It was the Marcus Fizer-led Iowa State team in the Elite Eight. Final four was 8 seed Wisconsin, who stunned the Gilbert Arenas, Richard Jefferson-led Arizona team in the round of 32. And the title game against Florida that year, which we'll wait and see if we get a rematch of that in this year's tournament with a potential 1-2 matchup in that region. But that was before his prime, Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan was like 22 years old, as far as I'm concerned, when that national championship happened.
Teddy Dupay was one of the most hateable players I've ever dealt with. He was on that team, and just, you were rooting for Michigan State just because you didn't want him to win a championship.
Mike Miller on that team,
yeah.
On that Florida team. But yeah, Michigan State was the lone 1 seed that even reached the Elite Eight that year. Just a bananas tournament, the way that it played out. And Michigan State benefited from that. So not a bad team, and it's like the team for the Big Ten. Hey, we won a national championship in the 21st century. Did you? But yeah, that makes me feel much better that you guys were going to try and pick it with your last pick.
Carolina was an 8 seed. They were in that Final Four also.
Oh gosh, they were, weren't they?
Yeah, I was there.
That would have been 2000. Who would have been the most noteworthy player on 2000 Carolina? Because that was
Ed
between
Cota.
eras.
Ed Cota.
That's right. Afro.
Ed
Cota.
And they had Florida beat in that semifinal till he fouled out with about 5 minutes to go, and then they had nobody to bring a ball up, and they turned the ball over, and Florida took advantage. Yeah.
So I think I may have maybe misunderstood the assignment here. I have got a lot of like lucky champions on, because like Mario Chalmers, that was kind of a lucky bounce. UNC was lucky that they had the refs in their pocket. So I'm just going to keep that going, because 2010 Duke should have lost to Butler. I'll go out and say that. Like that goal,
I like it.
Got so close, so close. We've already mentioned 2010 Butler wishing that they could have been in that next championship against that UConn team. That was Brad Stevens' best team there. Like Gordon Hayward was incredible. That shot was inches from going in. That was at Lucas Oil, I believe.
Yep.
So, Butler magic there, but just came up just short. So I consider that to be a little bit lucky. It was a good Duke team. It wasn't. I wouldn't put it on the Mount Rushmore of Duke teams, though. There was some good, the 90s teams, there's been some even this decade, this team this year, like if they win a championship, is going to have an argument for one of the best players in college basketball history with Cooper Flagg. So, yeah, I just think that bounce was really beneficial for Duke, obviously.
You guys are killing me, because the Michigan State team and now the Duke team were both on my list, and I thought that I was going to, sneak those through there. That Duke team, I would say that was number 5 out of the 5 Coach K national championships. It was clearly the least talented. It was a great team that was very connected. John Shire was the point guard of that team. And if you remember, they lost to Georgetown really bad in that tournament, not in that tournament, but in like early January or mid-January. And that's when K switched Nolan Smith and Shire. Nolan Smith was the point guard, and Shire was the shooting guard, and they switched them. But that team didn't take off until Brian Zubek got put into the starting lineup in early February. And, he had a nondescript career. The kid had the greatest month of anybody who had not done anything previously the previous 3.5 years. And that's the reason they won, because they really didn't have a big until he started playing. And so, yeah, that was not a really talented Duke team as, compared to Duke teams.
Yeah, they had so many more teams that got embarrassed. I mean, the Jabari Parker team that lost. Like there are so many other instances that you could have pointed to Duke and said that's a national championship team. And this,
well, the 99 team that lost to UConn in St. Pete. I mean, they were 32-1 until K decided to have Trajan Langdon try to create his own shot instead of spotting up like he had the whole game. But anyway, it's that was not a great Duke team.
And Shire being kind of the face of it now feels, interesting to looking back on. And as I always tell people, John Shire dropped 32 against my brother in the Mid-Suburban League playoffs back in the day. And I got to tell Shire about that 2 years ago when he was here in Orlando for the NCAA tournament. Got to go down memory lane, still remember Buffalo Grove High School. So John Shire has made Duke somewhat likable. Go figure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Crazy.
Agree to disagree.
As likable
Yeah.
as they can be, John Shire is trying to at least do that.
Sure.
Yeah, it was funny. I went back. It popped up on my TikTok feed of like the last few minutes of that championship game. And so, of course, I watch all of it and just seeing Shire. Like, people have asked me, I could have been like, oh, yeah, Shire was on their team. He played. But just actually seeing it, it's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Crazy
He was
looking back.
Jewish Jordan in the
That's
suburbs
right.
of Chicago, Glenbrook North. He's the best basketball player I've ever seen at that level. I witnessed him drop 31 points in the first half of an 8th grade basketball game. And it was just like, who is this dude, this alien? John Shire was a revelation.
Skinny little guy with crazy facial expressions.
Yeah, and always just dominated wherever he went. So like to see that player, not even like he was a really good player at Duke, but he wasn't all time Jay Williams or Redick or Leitner or any of those guys. But just goes to show you, man, this this basketball thing is really, really difficult, and even the great ones, they get held to a different standard.
2010 Duke was the last team on my board, so I'm curious to see where Connor goes from here.
I'm off. I'm good. That was my last pick. So.
Oh
yeah,
okay.
It's Brett than me.
It's Brett's pick. Okay, I'm interested.
Oh, thank goodness, because
All right.
I've only got one
Don't
left
cite me.
here. I'm going with 86 Louisville, the Doctors of Dunk. Daryl Griffith and that crew. I mean, they were really flashy, but I thought the team that they beat, I thought that Duke team that they beat. We talked about Duke teams that should have won national championships that were really much better than the one in 10. I thought that was Kay's first really great team. The Johnny Dawkins, Tommy Amaker, Jay Billis crew, and it just didn't seem like they were going to lose. And if I remember right, they were up. And Kay did it to himself. He pulled the ball out and slowed down the tempo, and that allowed Louisville to come back. Wait a minute, timeout. Nope, wrong era. This is the Daryl Griffith. I'm thinking of the team that lost. Anyway. So no, this is the right. Yeah, 86, right?
Trust your gut over what we're going to say.
Yeah, don't ask me.
Anyway, take over, guys, because I've already, I'm having an old person moment here.
80s Duke
80s
should have won a title. 86 Louisville, you said. That still plays.
86 Louisville, yeah. Okay.
We're not going to push back on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I'm having a senior moment here, guys.
Purvis Ellison was on that team, right? That's a name that I remember.
Yes, he was a freshman. Never Nervous Purvis. He was the MOP on that team. Okay. Yeah, so that's the team. It wasn't the Daryl Griffith team. That was previous. So yeah, but
do they still
it still holds.
Did they still recognize that Kenny Payne was on that team, or has he been wiped from the?
Yes,
the
he was, and actually
book?
Nolan Smith's father was on that team as well, I believe. But Kay had the lead in that game and pulled it out and slowed it down and started milking the clock, and that allowed Louisville to kind of get some momentum and come back and beat them. So that still stands. Yeah,
I'll never win the big one, Coach K.
Yeah,
I bet he doesn't win anymore.
I bet you're right.
Oh.
All right, for Mr. Irrelevant, it's the last one on my board. Well, I guess I have kind of one other one. I put COVID in 2020.
Yeah,
terrible winner. But I'll give an actual pick. It wouldn't be right if I didn't have a Kansas team on my board, because I'm also very anti-Kansas. Can't stand them growing up in Missouri.
Preach.
And I'm going based off pretty much one stat because it's a tough one. Like they were a good team, but they weren't a great team, because we all know the saying, good teams win, great teams cover. Looking back at the ATS records of the last 10 champions, there were 2 that were 55%, so still profitable, and then the rest were all 60s and 70s, except for 2022 Kansas, who was only 50%. So I'm going to go with 2022 Kansas. I know they were a good team, went down big against North Carolina. I was loving watching that first half. They were down 40-25. and then put up 47 in the second half to come back with the largest comeback. But they did get a lot of free, easy turnover points that I'll lessen that. Group effort, they didn't have like one guy like McCormick, of course. They had it was a good team,
It was
but
kind of surprising that McCormick like never did more in the NBA. Like he was
yeah,
pretty solid, but
he,
like they
he
have a
was a
couple
big
of good
name.
NBA players on that team, and it's
Yeah, Braun, they've got, and
Brown and Baji.
Braun, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I like that team. That wasn't Jalen Wilson's best year, but like that's probably a good thing because when Jalen Wilson started taking over, sometimes he'd get, he maybe thought that he was going to have one of his Carmelo Anthony runs to the title, but it never really materialized there for him. What's crazy is DeJuan Harris was on that team, and he's still on the team today. So
Yeah, makes sense with a couple of
You
years.
know, they caught a North Carolina team in that championship game two that got on an all time heater. I mean, that was a team that until this year, when this team goes on the same kind of heater and gets to the Final Four,
I'll call him a
you
shot.
know,
There we go.
but really they were on the bubble. It wasn't quite as controversial a pick to get into the tournament as this one was, but they were in doubt all the way up to Selection Sunday, and they just kind of caught fire, and they got some bracket luck because if I remember right, Baylor was the number one seed in their bracket, and their best player was hurt, didn't play. They got a huge lead. Brady Manick got thrown out of the game and had to win in overtime. And then they caught Duke for the second time in 3 weeks in K's last game, and all the pressure of the world was on the Blue Devils in that game. And so, yeah, Kansas kind of got
Yeah,
they got a break there playing the Tar Heels in
yeah.
the
They
championship.
also they played 10 seed Miami in the Elite Eight to
Yeah.
get to the Final Four, so they had a little luck on their side as well.
I covered that last year of that I was in California at the time, and I went to the San Francisco, when it was Musselman and Arkansas, and then Coach K was there, and I think Arkansas took down Gonzaga, I think,
Yep.
and then lost to Duke. And I was hoping that I would get to cover K's last game at Duke, but obviously that wasn't the case. But I was hoping to. So that was my memories of that year's team, and then it was disappointing to see it go down to Kansas winning it all.
Yeah,
Down 15 at half too of that game, and it
Yeah,
went on.
I was
What did they?
pumped.
Yeah, it started the second half on like an 18-1 run or something.
That was that Kansas team though. When Brown got hot, like you could get hot. Like Baji, same thing. Jalen Wilson, like like I said, he was thought a little too much of his offensive game sometimes. But when he was hot, he was a spark plug off the bench, kind of like like a Lou Williams in the NBA. So
The other thing that helped is that Caleb Love couldn't miss in the first half, and in the
Yep.
second half he wouldn't stop shooting because he couldn't
Yeah.
make one.
yeah.
typical Caleb Love game.
Yeah.
We still see it at Arizona. Just
Yeah.
if he's on, good luck beating him. But he's not
It
always
really
on.
takes the shooters don't stop shooting.
Yeah,
Somebody
Shoot or
said,
shoot.
like the worst.
Just remember
thing-
though, they could play Duke in I believe the Sweet 16 this year, and he has won his last 3 games against Duke. So and he's had great games in the last 2 that I can remember. The Final Four one, and then last year at Cameron in November. So keep that in mind.
I think like Caleb Love is like the human embodiment. I think it was a Kobe quote. I could be wrong about that, but he's like, you never want to, if you're a shooter, you never want to go like 0 for 4 because that means that you stopped shooting. He's like,
Yeah.
if you're a shooter, you would rather go like 0 for 20 than
Yeah.
You mean
the
0 for
Deion
9 like he did
Waiters.
against Clemson last year in the
Yeah,
Sweet
exactly.
16?
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's the Deion Waiters. I'd rather go 0 for 30 than 0 for 9 because
Yeah.
if I go 0 for 9, that means I stop shooting.
Exactly. That's who it is. I just figured it was a Kobe quote, but
Yeah. Same thing.
In Deion Waiter's mind, that's the same thing.
exactly.
All right, I'll run through all of our picks. I had 2014 UConn, 1997 Arizona, 2019 Virginia, 2022 Kansas. Brett had 85 Villanova, 89 Michigan, 2013 Louisville, and 86 Louisville. And then Adam had 2005 UNC, 2008 Kansas, 2002 Maryland, 2010 Duke, and Connor had 2011 UConn, 1988 Kansas, 2003 Syracuse, and 2000 Michigan State.
How are we doing? Are we
Sure.
going to vote on this? Are we going to put this up to a poll to see who won? Do we want to go based on comments? If we're going to talk about a bunch of losers, there's got to be a winner, I would
Sure.
assume.
Yeah, I think we'll get a poll out there, and we'll see whose was the worst, I guess, which makes it the best.
I can
I like
already
that.
anticipate getting plenty of UNC hate for picking them in round one, but
Yeah.
you know what? I don't care. Bring it.
Did you
I
guys have
like
any
it.
that you thought would be picked that wouldn't or feel like they need to be part of an honorable mention?
My board's clear.
Yeah, I
Mine
think
is
we cleared
too.
them out pretty good.
I almost picked 2006 Florida, a team that I loved. I so much.
The first one, right?
Yes, the
Yeah,
first one.
they crossed my mind too, but I couldn't put them down.
Almost picked them just because that team was 8-6 at one point in SEC play. They had started off 17-0, I think it was, and then they really just got hot in the SEC tournament. And I remember that year, I think I was homesick from school or something like that, and I watched the entire SEC tournament, and I just fell in love with Joakim Noah. And I became the biggest Joakim Noah fan. And Florida was a 3 seed, and I picked him to win it all that year. And I got so much crap for it, like my bracket pool and stuff like that. I bought a Florida sweatshirt, and then they just went on this unbelievable run. Corey Brewer, Tareen Green. That team, though, was flawed. It was flawed, and they were a year early, which they showed us by winning it all the next year. But I didn't include it because it's a little bit like, the 23 UConn team. We lumped those teams into a specific run, like 22 Georgia in football, where, not like a historically great team, but part of a historically great run.
Or
So that's not
91
necessarily going to
Duke.
play as well. Yeah, 91 Duke is a good example.
Because the next year they were like 34-2. That first Duke team lost 7 games, and you remember they were a huge underdog to UNLV. Because the year before they lost by 30. Yeah,
but it's so tough to include that because you're like, all right, well, it's part of this. If you repeat, you're in college basketball lore. You're not going to be remembered as like a bad team. So I thought that would tank my selections a little bit too much. But I thought 06 Florida, if we're talking about like flawed national champs, that team just was epitome of get hot at the right time.
And I'll throw out another honorable mention. Do we miss any Kansas teams? I'll just lightly throw that in the honorable mentions.
All of them.
They probably cheated and got lucky and all that stuff. So
probably at some point. 2017 UNC was the only other one that I included on this list, just because like that team, Brett, a bunch of G Leaguers, and maybe that's kind of how Roy liked it. He wasn't going to get those. He wasn't going to do the one and done stuff. Like he never did that. But that team was just loaded with G Leaguers. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I don't know who's going to actually be a decent pro on this team, but it's just not one of the more memorable UNC teams, even of that era. And kind of their only real defining moment that year was the Luke May shot against Kentucky in the Elite Eight. And that's like how you remember that specific team, but maybe a little bit more of like the not necessarily like a scrappy underdog UNC team, because they've had more real examples of that lately, but not necessarily a team that we remember as this great, unbelievable juggernaut, that UNC's been throughout the 21st century.
No, they weren't. That wasn't like the 2010 or the 2009 team that just boat raced everybody by 20. Hansbrough and that crew just had their way. Yeah,
that's all I got.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was great. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll find out who had the best draft.
Thanks, guys.
All right, take care, guys.